This is Duke University.
I'm going to introduce the speakers, the panelists, from my far left to my nearer left, and yes, that does signify, but left is the operative word. Professor Brittney Cooper is a 2009 alumna of the Graduate Institute of Liberal Studies at Emory. She has a PhD in American Studies and also HBCU grad from Howard with a bachelor's degree in English and political science. Professor Cooper is a scholar of Black women's intellectual history, Black feminist thought, race and gender. She's also co-founder of what we all know now as the Crunk Feminist Collective, a feminist of color scholar activist group. Next, Jessica Marie Johnson is an assistant professor of history at Michigan State University, holds a PhD and MA from University of Maryland College Park, and a BA in African and African American Studies from WashU in St. Louis. So for anyone who asks, what can you do with a degree in AFAM studies, you can be on a panel like that. Also want to say she was a Mellon Mays. Her research interests include women, gender, and sexuality in the African diaspora, histories of slavery and the slave trade, and she is a digital humanist who founded the African Diaspora PhD blog. So, and this is what you can do with digital humanities. Martha Jones is a member of the law school's faculty and associate professor of history and chair of University of Michigan's Department of Afro-American and African Studies. She's co-director of the Michigan Law Program in Race, Law, and History. Her PhD is from Columbia and a JD from CUNY School of Law. And prior to joining Michigan's faculty, she was a public interest litigator for the HIV Project and legal services. Her work there focused on the rights of people with disabilities. She's been recognized and supported by ACLS, a visitor at the National Humanities Center, so she knows it's better to be here in the winter than in Michigan. She was a Friday Fellow there. Blair Kelly is our neighbor and PhD come back. She's Associate Professor of History at North Carolina State University and now Assistant Dean of Interdisciplinary Studies and International Programs. So you can be a dean and still talk about standing. She's the author of the award-winning Right to Rise, Our Boy Cops and African American Citizenship, which just keeps racking up awards. She received her BA from the University of Virginia in History and AFAM Studies, and her MA and PhD from Duke University. So I am just delighted to welcome all of these scholars to this panel. You can probably hear that there is a thread of law woven through this, although from this morning's panel, I kind of doubt we'll stay strictly within those guidelines. But there was a guideline, which is really interesting, of the Equal Protection Clause. And the title of the panel, The Illegality of Black Womanhood, the way we do it with the parentheses, Legality of Black Womanhood. And then in case you didn't get that part, you got to testify because the booty don't lie. So, we're speaking to multiple constituencies here. But the framework was the Equal Protection Clause and the context of intersectionality in the work of Black womanhood. And since we have ShondaLand giving us these multiple and complex visions of Black women, one of the things I thought I'd start out as a general question is, what do we have to say about ShondaLand and the legal construction, both in terms of framing the Black body and I would suggest the outlaw fugitive aspects of Black womanhood. I'm going to start with Brittney, and we'll just start with that general question and then go with the flow.
Cool. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. So I've been working with this construct of what would happen if we thought of the universe of ShondaLand as being like the dystopic universe she creates on Scandal, which is called Wonderland, right? And so, so a few things. One is we're treated, and I'm primarily an aficionado of Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder. I don't really do the medical dramas too tough, but there's a way that we're asked to engage with notions of Black womanhood in relationship to state power structures when we think about both Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder. And so part of this invites us into a question about what is the historical relationship of the Black female body to the apparatuses of state power and to the boundaries of nationhood, right? And so, Professor Holloway, one of the things that your question brings up for me, which is also refracted through last night's episode, is thinking about potentially a concept like Black female fugitivity, right?
You're talking about how to get away with murder?
No, I'm talking about Scandal, because she, and I'm thinking about captivity and fugitivity, right? So she is captive, because when I saw illegality, the other thing I thought about, because of how it visually appears, is illegibility, right? So that inability to capture fully Black womanhood, that this sort of notion about escape, right? And so there are all kinds of politics of escape that are happening here. So there's the way that Olivia escapes into these dream sequences and into her interior self that we don't have access to, that creates, so in a piece that Treva and I wrote a couple of years ago now, oddly enough, we talked about how her interiority was unsettling for folks because it meant that it was one of the few places, Olivia Pope's interiority, where you didn't have access to Black women's full selves, right? And so that we're so used to Black women being public and therefore judging them as ratchet, and yet we're so deeply uncomfortable with them being private and interior, right?
Right.
And so thinking about that as a generative possibility of fugitivity, or as a thing that can't be captured, or as a thing that's always running away or trying to escape. There's also a way that Liv is always trying to escape herself and her own demons, which is why she's an alcoholic, basically. Alcoholic. I mean, and she's beautiful in the drinking, and I support it. I don't know that you can have a bowl of wine and that be really healthy. So, maybe we would want to talk about that. So it makes me think about notions of a Black womanhood that cannot be fully apprehended. That so much of our attention is because she exceeds all of the scripts that we have. She doesn't fit the controlling images narrative. We're not entirely sure. So like one of the critiques I heard a lot of was, I mean, from black men haters and from other folks was, well, are we going to talk about how this show is, a narrative of state violence and how this Black woman is reifying or shoring up, acts of state violence because she's always saving folks so she can save Fitz. And I'm like, yeah, technically, but there's also the way to think, like, can we also talk about the possibility of the Black female body as the thing that stitches the American nation state together, right? And is the thing that has always done that. And so, yes, that's fundamentally violent, right? But that is a violence that Black women are imbricated in and through, but I don't know that the right read of that is to then see Black women as imperially complicit, right? I don't know that Black women are imperialists, right? So much as this is the position that we're always put in with regard to the nation state. So those are some of the things that I think about when I think about ShondaLand as a certain kind of dystopic narrative construction of the nation that puts the Black female body as the thread that holds the nation state together on full display.
So when I'm thinking about, thank you for starting that off, because that gave me also a lot to think about. So one of the things I think about when I think about this question of protection and the law, I actually think about the ways that in ShondaLand that Olivia Pope sort of represents the extent to which Black women sort of skirt outside of the law. So the way that Black women are stitching together the politics, the ideology of freedom in the nation, et cetera, et cetera. I actually sort of, coming out of slavery, coming out of dealing with enslaved women and free women of color who are always sort of managing, not necessarily in the breaks, I sort of challenge that in the breaks of what's bondage means, but actually I think are composed of it, are comprised of it, in that they actually unstitch that idea of freedom, right? So like this question of protection, I think ShondaLand and Scandal in particular, and we can talk about the other shows, I'm thinking of Scandal because I'm thinking of the way that Olivia is actually never quite protected by anybody. Like she is the lover of the president, and the president there are these moments where he is both domineering, but also very caring of her, very desiring of her, but doesn't necessarily translate to protection. In some ways, it also translates to these interesting vestiges of property. There are ways that she is Jake's lover, and he wants to spend the sun with her, but he kills indiscriminately, including one of her friends. There are ways that her father, who, if we're thinking of the gendered ideas of nation and empire, like the father as the head of household is the epitome of that in a lot of ways. That's the same ways that the president is the epitome of that for the nation or for the free world. And he's the last one to protect her, and yet also sort of the first. So I find it interesting that Olivia can represent for us, can embody for us, and allow us to picture in some ways the actual terrain that enslaved and free women of color would have operated in, as being lovers, as being taken over by slave owners, by people who are potentially their husbands, by business partners, by slave owners owning plantations, by masters in workshops, by owners of property, even though they maybe are working the tavern or they're working boarding places. So there's ways that they are never quite, they don't actually fit into the typical modes of protection that the nation has set up for us, that ideas of gender, of sexuality, of society have set up for us, and can help us see how this is an incomplete project. But also can sort of help us see, like, how is protection really a useful narrative? At the end of the day, is there something liberatory to it? I thought it was interesting in the last episode where Abby says, gosh, what is it? You have to save yourself. You're the only gladiator here. And there was a whole uproar, I remember, on Twitter. It was like, yes, girl, save yourself, you can do it. And I was kind of like, that's a funny thing. You know, there's something in there that's vestiges of kind of liberal body that can, lift itself up and can be removed from all these kind of constraints of history, of society, of lack of resources, of slavery. But at the same time, it's like we want that, right? We sort of want that theme. You don't want to be protected, but you do. And I think there's ways that Olivia, at least, and I think we can talk about it in the other shows, but Olivia at least sort of traffics in some of those, in the underside of the legalities that are supposed to, in theory, sort of watch over us.
I was thinking of Project Pat. Don't say what. She don't want to say. She don't want to say that.
Lift it up.
So I also want to say thank you very much for having us here, and it's really a privilege to be with these extraordinary women and to have this conversation in real time and in flesh and body with you all that we've been having for so long on social media. I think I'm here in part because, or I understand why I'm here better by way of your question, which is I'm here as a Black woman lawyer, I'm here as a Black woman law professor, and I think that's my entry point, why Thursday night there's no other place I can be except with Olivia and with Annalise. And this has really given me an opportunity to reflect on sort of why that is something that is nothing short of a compulsion for me. And I want to offer up, I think, the notion that these are two women as a set of ideas who are really themselves the embodiment of law. They are themselves the embodiment of legal authority. And what happens when we think about law and legal authority as embodied through Black women, and these particular Black women. A lot of us, I think, have been watching reruns of various things in anticipation of this day, and I certainly have done my share of rewatching Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder in particular. Homework. But I also have been thinking about the other ways in which, for me, in my life, the images, the constructions of Black women as lawyers, as agents of law, as law, have come to me. I had to go back to that text that is Lonnie Guinier, 1993. We know the story of Lonnie, nominated by Bill Clinton, dropped by Clinton in that extraordinary 18-minute press conference in which she stands in front of a podium, withdraws her nomination, and I think like many of us, if I could have leapt into the box, right, and stood with her at the podium, would have. I was this close to my television, in part because this is the moment, right, in which I understand my guild, right, and who the guild that I'm a part of, that she stands for in such a painful way. It's no accident to me, perhaps, in my own mind, that this week, while again we're watching reruns, Loretta Lynch is there in front of the Senate, and herself becoming the text. But I want to make the segue, if I can, to Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder, because there are those Delta sisters in red. I don't know if any of you have seen the images in the Senate chamber, and it's extraordinary, which is to say, that's the moment for me that helps me make the connection between what might be the perhaps more academic questions about law, and to recognize how embodiment is so much a part of that, right? It's in the red suits and the jackets and the sweaters and the lapels, right? And it is in that space on Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder where I think both Olivia and Annalise tell us something about Black women lawyering through that embodiment that is the stiletto, right? That is the finely cut jacket, that is all of that, that you all have helped me come back to thinking about my own evolution in the courtroom and in the classroom. So, so I want to take them as text, and I hope we'll get to talk more about that.
We absolutely have to. I just want to add make sure that we ask the question about that juxtaposition of sorority sisters at Loretta Lynch's moment and the VH1 show that has now been canceled. For the Loretta Lynch moment, I don't know if John sold so many red suits, power suits, but it was a powerful image. But then when you wrote sorority sisters, you know, if you're on Twitter like me, it immediately brings up that VH1 show, which I can be in a room and admit, yes, I watched it. I want to turn to Blair, and I think we're all involved in these legal spaces, and these legal spaces are necessarily historic.
Well, I'm very thankful to be here and thankful to have the opportunity to talk about a personal obsession and turn it into my work product.
That's a very lawyerly term.
And so I love, so a bunch of things came to mind when I was thinking about Olivia Pope, because she's sort of the center of my interest in ShondaLand, as I think she is for most of us. So first I thought of Olivia Pope maybe as a Harriet Tubman figure, right? So she's there, she's already sort of dealt this world of law, of figuring out, so she has the technique of escape for her clients, right? So she shows up with the shotgun, and she's ready to get you out of whatever situation you're in. So I'm thinking, the ways in which Black women have, the invisibility of the ways in which Black women have been leaders around questions of legality, around questions of freedom, and the way in which their actions in and of itself question the morality of those laws, right? And so, but then I began thinking about sort of the worlds that Olivia Pope has inhabited, and the way that, we've sort of devolved with Olivia. So when we start with Olivia, she has a pretty clear-cut job. She's a legal cleaner. Like, so if you run into a bad situation, she can fix it for you. And she's very knowledgeable about the inside things. Her crew will do anything they need to move you towards us. They'll move a body, they'll cover things up, they'll torture someone, they'll do whatever, you need done.
I have a list.
And so you think, so Olivia's not a clean moral figure, right? She's not clean when it comes to the basics of the law. Neither are her clients, neither are the gladiators. But as the show goes on, we realize that this is surface. We think, oh, we've been led into something exciting and insightful that we don't know about the world. But she's operating on the surface. And there's the things that she does not know about the presidency. So she involves herself in, helping her lover win the election illegally. And she's torn up. She's broken about that. But all of her colleagues are not. All of her colleagues are murderers and liars and warmongers, right? So that whole crew of people are in worse moral shape than Olivia. And then we devolve further and we meet her father. And we're like, oh my God, well, this is the guy who runs the CIA, you know, but on the dark side. And so we move into his world where, you know, you put your wife in a pit for, I don't know, 10 years or something and pretend that she's dead. So, you know, we keep devolving. And then this season has opened us up to seeing a further devolve, that her father was actually protecting her from a whole crew of people we've never even heard of yet. We don't even know what's going to happen now. And so I think of her as sort of an interesting sort of moral guide through this, but also not really knowing where she's going and not really having any sort of legal hold anymore. Her being a lawyer, how does that serve her in this sort of extra legal world? And so for me, that is an interesting metaphor about blackness, that if we inhabit a world where the rules don't cover us, where the things that we've studied and held up as the truths of our life really have no meaning anymore. When it comes to us, it doesn't really happen. So I think it's an interesting sort of critique of what we think of as law as sort of being transcendent of us, rather than something that is sometimes very surface and not very helpful. And the last thing I thought about historically was the term gladiator. Right, so when we hear that, we're like, yeah, they're gladiators. She wears that snatch white coat, she has that hat on, she has gloves, and she's snatched. So we're really excited. But gladiators are performers for the state to keep people distracted. Gladiators are not warriors. Gladiators are enslaved people who work for the glory of the state, right? And they distract people from the real things going on. So even the choice of the term gladiator is an interesting one. So that she is, her body, the folks around her are being used to keep this state going.
So what it seems we have that can be a thread here is whether or not the law is something that sutures. The black woman's body is something made by law and at the same time outside of law, and it's that necessary dialectic between those two positions that sort of allows Olivia to emerge. And I also want to hear where Annalise is in this, because she's a professor. You know, she's up there sort of teaching the law at the same time as your word devolution. Things are quickly falling apart, Chinua Achebe. So the whole notion of the professor being in a position to instruct and at the same time use the law to her own. Is this a woman with, are these women with power, or are these women made because of the authority of the state?
One of the terms I've been playing around with and thinking about the moral universe that they inhabit, which is also perhaps about the legal universe and universe of power, is and Blair is making me think more about this, is that it's a post-moral universe, right? It's not amoral, it's decidedly immoral, but what happens is that you can't ever pin down what's right or what's wrong, right? What's right or wrong is dependent on who you're supposed to be supporting, and so part of our own our feeling of being disoriented sometimes when we watch, I think, is that we're on the side of people who we don't really support their choices, though. But we sort of fundamentally believe and live in the project that she represents. And so how do you believe in the representational project of a person and the possibilities that you hear when they do call up everything that you know to be unsavory about the operations of state power and black lives and women's lives, right? So I've been thinking about what would happen if we thought about this as a post-moral universe, and I'm thinking of black folks in the ways that Blair says as never quite being, you can't ever quite read us or take our experiences in relationship to the accepted or authoritative narratives. And so what does that mean? So that's one thing. The other thing that's interesting, Carl, that your question raises for me is about watching Annalise. So last night in that episode where the test becomes, she takes their lot, this thing that they've done, this crime they've committed, and she spins it as a narrative, right? But she says to them, so now what you have the opportunity to do is use this classroom to create your own pathway to freedom, right? To figure out how to get out of this horrendous set of things that you have done. So that is every kind of, right, isn't it? Right, because it's, because it becomes interesting how a fact pattern of things they've actually done gets re-narrated in any way that they choose to construct it, right? And so, so the postmodern literary folks should love it. But also, that is what Black women professors do in the academy, right? Is we step into classrooms and we say to students, whatever backgrounds you bring, your narrative matters here.
We can work on that.
Right. Your narrative matters here, and it can become a map to your own freedom, depending on how you arrange it, how you think about it, how you use the resources that you get in this classroom and meld them together. And what's interesting too, when I watch her, because even though I'm not a law professor, I'm just a professor, but when I watch her, I just think about how your life could be falling apart. Your dude ain't acting right. Your side dude is acting sketchy. You have a bunch of students who are raggedy and are, needy and then you have all these pressures to perform. But when you step into the room, you look mega accomplished, right? People see the outward, right? When you go home and take your wig off, it's like, because we were talking about her taking it off, but it's like, y'all remember, they're taking that off is also because we about to fight, because it's about to go down, and so, so that's a glamour. Right, y'all know Black women have a glamour. Let me take this bracelet off and give it back. All she needed was that Vaseline, and she y'all know Shonda was signifying on that kind of glamour. I'm not making that up. And so for me, there's also just that, right? The ability to see that, and to think about what it means that so much of our academic lives and our professional lives in this moment, if we want to think about moments, are tied to the performativity of looking respectable and looking like you have it all together. And then you watch on TV and you're like, she ain't got nothing together. The only thing she has together is her brilliance when she steps on the stage of that classroom. But everything else is falling apart. And I know that has been my life at some point, and I certainly know it's been the lives of some of my homies. So, so I feel like that is also the space. And here's the thing that I wonder about. When we're really uncomfortable with those kind of representations, is it because they feel so true for us, and what we want TV to be is a space of fugitivity and escape, right? And so when it forces us to confront ourselves and see that messiness, some of us revel in that because it feels real and affirming. Other folks, I think, want us to forever be clear.
So we can't say bye, Felicia, the way.
I said bye. I said bye.
So we're dealing with both morality, fugitivity, and the notion of, and we would get to it, respectability politics. Take us up, Jessica or Claire.
Well, I just kind of want to add on to, as far as the question of sort of Annalise and how power operates, just to think about what Blair's already said about Scandal and about Olivia, and also happened with Grey's Anatomy and Grey. Like, there's a lot of layers that Shonda Rhimes and the writers sort of unfold in ShondaLand over a lot of time. It took us a long time to get to Olivia and Papa Pope and Mama Pope, who we haven't necessarily talked that much about in their relationship, to actually get to, there's a lot laying under this. To then a scene that for me, like in this last episode, was so much about ideas of bondage and ideas of terror and how, what is the making of a slave, right? What does that actually mean in practice? How does that look? How does that feel?
Does it look like Mama in the basement?
Does it look like Mama in the basement? Does it look like you coming out of a box and realizing you're in another box? Does it look like negotiations with power? Like, yes, all of these questions end up kind of coming up, but it took us 4 seasons to get there. Because we start off with Olivia in the white suit with, her biggest problem is that she's sleeping with the president, and I mean.
Her biggest problem is sleeping with the president.
So, and that is a problem, but there's also ways that you can play with that and be like, oh, that's a good thing. So I just want to kind of think about, as we think about Annalise as a figure in the way that she's operating power, I actually don't think we know what she wants yet. We know that she's messy. We know that there's a lot that is going on in her personal life and also in her life as a professor. She uses her students in some really problematic ways. But we have yet to really unpack, how do you get away with murder? And who's murdering Annalise trying to get away with? And I think as we do that, that's where that's the interesting thing about Shonda and thinking about power where it operates. like, she takes these iconic, huge figures, the professor, the lawyer, the president, the cleaner, and then asks us to kind of think about, okay, but how does power actually operate and practice in their lives, and also in the lives of who they're impacting? How are they, what power can they access, and who has power over that which they're accessing? And then we find that in the end of the day, like, everybody has somebody in power over them. Even the president ends up being beholden to Papa Pope in the last couple episodes. He's talking to him like, oh, you're my lost father. You know, like, it's just, or and Papa Pope says it. It's like, I'm your concubine, I'm your lover, I'm your father, I'm your mother, I'm your friend, I'm your elder, I'm your son, like, all these things.
It's a bit much.
It's a lot. It's a lot, but I think that it's interesting in that, in this question of who has moral authority and who gets the authority of power, that in ShondaLand these things are all really slippery and show us that power in some ways is more dynamic than we give it credit for, you know, which is something that we can learn if we're thinking about social movements, that it's not one thing that we then have to take down, or one system or one person, that it's actually, that these things are much more interrelated than we maybe give space to. If that makes sense.
I want to hear from Martha and Blair on this, but I note that you ended back with this idea of power and morality, and both of those being slippery. And the idea of the law is it's supposed to shape it in a way that's manageable, that we can come to a solution from whatever set of problems we have. Except we're dealing with these notions of a slippery concept of morality, where either the president is a good person to be involved with, the best person there is, or this is real trouble. So I wonder if you might not only take up from where Jessica left off, but also give us a sense of how the law is supposed to function in this sort of equal protection universe, but at the same time maybe telling us consistently that there is no equal protection if you're a Black woman.
I mean, so this is a long debate among critical
We
legal
have
scholars.
about
Legal scholars, right? Sort of what is the function of law, right? Is law the embodiment of rights, of sort of inalienable claims, or rights as malleable as sort of any other precept that we might offer up? And I think that I want to come back to that space of the classroom, because I think it's, for me, important to frame Annalise in that space of the classroom, in the law classroom, as a site of contestation, an ideological space, a space that we recognize is just yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the day before, one of the deans at a law school had to come out and admonish the students to no longer remark in their evaluations about women professors' clothing and attire, etc. But it can formally admonish the student body and put this off the table. So it's a fraught space, we know that. And to watch Annalise navigate that, right, I think is to remember that there are no rules, right? That everybody in that space is constructing a kind of authority, partly out of morality.
Except isn't it important that it pretends that it is not a fraught space?
Absolutely, and that's what, so when I think about her physicality in that space, right? The way she paces the front of that room, the way she wields the Socratic method in a way that's almost a parody of the Socratic method for most of us today, right? Is the dramatization, right, of how one then grapples with exactly that question for me. And so I think that down to who gets to say what the canon is, right? What you teach, what the rules are, and what matters. So one of the objections to Annalise, right, is that every class seems to turn, right, on some deep self-interest. But we might say that's always what the law classroom is, right? That's what canons are about, right? Is precisely about ideology driving, about what's in and what's out, what's taught and what's not, the canon, the anti-canon, and so what happens, right? And how disturbed are we by the possibility that a Black woman can command the law classroom? She can be the embodiment of law, and she can also tell us what the canon is, what matters, what's in, what's out. That's what's going on all the time. But
She's making law, right?
She
Her
is.
very presence.
She is.
So I want to go back to the sort of question of presentation, right? And so you were talking about the law professors presenting something to students that they find problematic over and over and over again in very gendered ways, right? And so what interests me is the degree to which, so when I'm watching Scandal or How to Get Away with Murder on Twitter with the rest of my community, part of what we revel in is the respectability. Like what we get excited about are the suits and the gloves and the white sofa that we know she's gonna be mad about when she gets back. You know, everything is just impeccable. The hair that never gets messed up. You can go into captivity and you just look a little better. Yeah, no, you look beautiful at every turn. She looked like, I tweeted that she looked like she was in a very interesting yoga class. And so we enjoy that. We enjoy the Annalise, you know, the putting on and the taking off. And so I think that the putting on and the taking off and the showing and the straightening your hair when you get back from the sun and all those things that happen magically. You know, who does Olivia Pope's hair? Where is her stylist?
And what was she doing in the shower, getting her hair wet? What was it coming
Yes,
like after that?
she got out. And her hair was right there.
I let you know here and make
But part of what's interesting to me is that we enjoy the putting on and the taking off. So to me, it's a consciousness about respectability that we all have. And we all see it as a tool that we can put on and use for our own power, to wield our classrooms, to command a room, and then we can take it off. It's not who we are. We recognize it as a problematic tool, a complicated tool, a tool that may alienate someone who doesn't have those things to put on or to take off, right? And so I love the sort of way in which this generation is really just done with the idea that somehow, you know, pulling up your pants and putting on a tie means that people will protect you or take care of you or value your children or not shoot you for no apparent reason. So we've sort of, in this generation, probably not mine, but in this generation, mostly in the room, we've dropped that thought. And thank God for that. But it's still interesting the way in which we still play in the coming in and the going out for ourselves and for our own performances and for our own consumption as enjoyable.
Because I think one of the most important, but also the most challenging dimensions of our conversations for me have been about the politics of pleasure. You all are teaching me a great deal about how to think in very new ways about old scenes that I understand. And so the thing I would add is that in reflecting on both Liv and Annalise, is to reread all of that through the lens of pleasure. So I was remembering last night that when I got home, my very first suit, you know, young lawyer, I can remember this, I was in Sims, where are my New Yorkers? Yes, right, so in the Sims, I'm on a budget, but you know, I'm putting on the suit, I can remember the blue and the pink pinstripes, the feel of the buttons, how, you know, my stockings felt when they, you know, sort of rubbed up against the lining of the pencil skirts, the big shoulder pads. So I could tell you that story about the suit, you know, as a constraining, right? As conformance, as constraining, as a mask, as a uniform. But I would have to confess, right, that when I walked into the courthouse, I felt good. I liked how I looked. I felt good, and I don't think that so it is partly generational, you know, that I came of age by way of women like Paulette Caldwell and Patricia Williams, my teacher, who told narratives of Black woman lawyers, Black woman law professors that were strife and burdened, right? They were strife and burdened and didn't have the possibility of acknowledging that moment when I unbuttoned that jacket strategically, and I know, right? I know what I'm doing. And I couldn't speak of that, I think, without access to this conversation. So I'm grateful.
So is the authority in our being able to to watch, to be the spectator on that kind of power, and at the same time know we can command it ourselves? Is this where our obvious enjoyment of, deep, very fine details in these performances by at least these two actors that we're talking about on Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder? Or are these women in a kind of danger that we are not engaging because we'd much rather see them as the president will save me? Equal protection under the law will save me. So is it the power we're enjoying or the danger of pleasure that we're enjoying?
Both.
Okay.
I was thinking about that moment last night where she was like, because I'm Olivia Pope. It means nothing.
Was that when she was in the basement room and the cold cement?
Right.
So
she was having to acknowledge that all the stuff, like all the putting on for her city that she does.
But she also meant I am Olivia Pope.
Right.
She meant it in one.
Oh, she meant it in a different way. Right, but I'm thinking about well, the thing it made me think about is what it means for her to sort of grapple with coming undone and then having to put herself back together, right? And so, because this is a moment where politically we feel undone, and wherever, when the Eric Garner decision, non-decision came down, and Treva just was like, I'm undone. And I was like, that's the word, right? That's the word. And so, because respectability is about being done. Hair done, nails done, everything done, right?
The nails done even after she scratched it.
Back on that, because you can have a performance, you can have an embodied, expressive performance, and it not be respectable, and you still want to be good. Like, you still want to be beat, you still want to have everything together.
Maybe
so I think there's a work there that talking about politics and respectability asks us to do. Like, it's a doneness in the service of the kind of power relation, but also in the service of pushing out other kinds of representations, that this is the proper and appropriate representation. And this is not, I'm not thinking of respectability across time and space. It has changed, it's different, it has its uses. In particular, historical moments, absolutely. But I think there's a work that we want that respectability, that piece does, that maybe it's interesting to separate from just the performance of being done, of being done up. And that, and I think in thinking about the kind of pleasurable aspects of the power, like, I actually find it very pleasurable that these things are taken apart, that Olivia can have her hair laid, but also have this messy relationship with Jake and Fitz. Like, there's something about that to me that says, like, yes, like, it is one skill to be put together in a particularly Black female way, and it's another skill, Black womanhood way, and there's another skill of, navigating different relationships, and these things the pleasure for me is that these things don't have to be tied together, at least as we're watching them, and that in reality, they aren't usually tied together. Very respectable people have very messy lives.
This makes me think about Ida B. Wells, and we have the pleasure with Ida B. Wells of a very modern kind of person living in an earlier time, and her voice is very clear to us now. And one of my favorite places to find her voice is in her diary when she's young. And she's going through this, right? She's doing racial justice work in an extremely dangerous time, right? She's doing work that none of us are doing, right? She is trying to stop lynching when there is no one concerned. There are no allies. She's, waging a movement where there are probably about 20 people in the nation who are concerned about it and willing to put their names and their bodies on the line to do that work. And yet she cares about how she looks. And she's worried about her hair and getting the fabric so that she can get the dress put together. And then she says to herself, like, well, I guess I shouldn't be worried about that, but I am. I like it, and it's important to me. And she's trying to perform a womanhood for a world that refuses to see her as a lady, as someone deserving protection and respect. But she's still important to her. It's part of her armor because she knows who she is inside of herself. So even though the clothes don't change the way the world sees her, and she knows that, the clothes make her feel something in that particular moment, in a very fraught moment. And so, sometimes we're quick to say, well, you were trying to perform something for someone else. But sometimes we're trying to convince ourselves, we're trying to say, okay, this is who I am, Olivia Pope. Right. And I'm going to get, I don't know how, but I'm going to get it.
So I just interrogate for a moment where that respectability lies then. Is it in the performance? Is it in the moral character? Is it in the You know, I have to admit, I bought a bag far too expensive because of Olivia Pope. I'm still paying on this bag, but I like it. And I don't know, maybe this bag is performing something for me. So when you see it, you just understand that she's, you know, I'm going for that respectability gene. So what is it that we're after with respectability? Is it interior, exterior? Who's going to give it to? And let me take it back to Shonda Rhimes, to Annalise or to Olivia.
I mean, but some of it, isn't it just about like that we enjoy it, right? I enjoy a nice bag. It looks fly, but they, you know, like my mama is a, you know, is bad and she likes bags. So any fashion sense I have, my mama gives it to me literally. So she bought me a bag for Christmas and I just be feeling it. I'm like, this leather's so smooth. I'm like, yes, mama. So it's, you know, so it's that, right, that we recognize quality, but it's also that, I mean, look, sometimes even in a neoliberal universe where we work harder than we've ever worked before and we still seem to never have enough, right? Sometimes just saying, look, it ain't that I can afford it, it ain't that people think I should have it, but damn it, I want it, right? I want it because I work hard and because it looks pretty, and you know, so look, I think we do ascribe some external, exterior things, right, around look and performance and whatever, but a lot of times, you know, that like where my folks live, I'm like, I know that this person walking up this particular street with that very nice Coach bag ain't balling out of control. So it's very clear visually if you carrying the Coach bag in the hood to your house in the projects, like we're not under any illusions about, like that doesn't fool us into thinking you're doing better than you're doing.
Right.
It actually does not. Right? So it is about, so then it can't just be about fooling people into thinking that you're something that you're not, so much as if these are the things that we say are objects of value in our society, then surely other folks want those accoutrements and adornments too, and it only becomes a problem when we want them. Right. And so, you know, I don't know. So for me, I think that I think that there's always the broader critique about what we're performing and putting on, but also that we've created a world in which so many of the nice things that we're taught to want elude folks, and then we resent them when they're like, well, I'm going to have it anyway. I'm just going to have it despite whether you think I deserve it or I've worked hard enough for it or I can afford it. I'm just going to go ahead and have it, right? And so then what does that mean? So that's one thing. But the other thing I want to say, because I'm thinking about the title of our panel, the Janelle Monáe line, right? The booty don't lie. Right, but then at the end she says, so Janelle Monáe comes back and says, even when you try to enemy, the booty don't lie, right? And so, you know, I wonder too about one. I mean, can we talk about the sex scenes? I mean, because I watch for the sex scenes. It's scary. I mean, why people being whatever type of way, like, you know. I mean, we gonna talk about. I mean, y'all call the panel.
Are we gonna go away from respectability? No. But
I'm saying that that's also part of it too, right? Is that the thing that bothers me about the like respectability conversation as well is that some of the tension about the respectability stuff is about the fact that Olivia Pope has good sex with lots of people, with her two people anyway, and then one of the opening scenes in How to Get Away with Murder is Annalise getting it in on that desk. Yeah. Right, and so we don't. So I just wonder, like, so it seems to me that part of the reason that we're so generationally invested in throwing off respectability is because we want to have a conversation about how do you have an intimate life as a Black professional woman that, you know, that can be messy, but it's also just about pleasure and about you asking for what you need and about you finding partners that are willing to give it to you. And I think that we are having that conversation because, you know, I say this, you know, to my homegirls a lot, like Black women have a whole sort of thing, particularly straight Black women, around wanting to get chose. Come on, right? And so what you see with, y'all know what I'm saying, right? You want somebody to choose you, right? So you see Olivia, and she got dudes like, she ultra chose, she super chose. You know, like she just getting chose, right? And so that there's something about being able to see not just our desire for the things we want, which is about respectability, politics, but also getting to see Black women be desired, right? That,
Objects of desire.
yes, as objects of desire, and then as having the power and agency to respond to that desire in a myriad of ways, to accept something. So she's got Edison after her, she's got Fitz and Jake, and with Edison, she's like, I don't really want what you bringing though, because I got these other dudes, and so I just want them. Right? And so so many folks want that kind of power, but they want to be desired. And I guess for me, the respectability frame doesn't allow us to talk about what happens when you are the object of desire, and it's not illegal. It's illicit, but it's not illegal.
But maybe that is exactly the frame that allows us to talk about it, because if we didn't have the other to respond to, then that ease of leaning into the conversation about sexual desire and sexual pleasure, which might also be the want in both of these shows that we're talking about. It allows us to go there because of this extraordinary veneer of respectability. I mean, what's more respectable than a room in the White House that is used for a particular purpose? So, I don't know, Martha, I saw it.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think about a space in which these two sort of ways of thinking come together, right? You know, so I'm a storyteller. So so I just offer you up this scene. When I arrive in the Midwest in my university and I begin to walk the corridors, I wear shoes that click on the floor. My shoes go click, click, click on the floor. And I become the subject of commentary. I hear when you're coming, I know it's you. And so here's this moment where sort of my notion of kind of my respectable law prof, my suit, my heel, all of that put down the floor, gets turned inside out. And now it's coming very close to this space that is about sexuality, that is about desire. It's not my desire, right? But it is about, it's approaching that.
Right.
And so, so my response, I think, to your point, Brittney, is partly, it has to be about my frame of reference, right? Because that's the only stability that there is, right? That I can adorn myself in a way that might be deemed respectable in some objective frame, but when my shoes click down the corridor in a world where everybody is wearing clogs and Arche and other crepe soles, now fair enough, and Crocs. Yes, you know my world. And so it has to be like, it has to be Olivia's frame, right? It has to come back to that.
Yeah, and I just want to go along with that a little bit, because I'm finding it, I kind of want to go back to the first panel and Treva's last remarks about finding new adjectives. I'm just finding it difficult to pull respectability all the way through ShondaLand. In part because Olivia herself seems like, as a figure, sort of transcends all the ways we want to think about even class, race, gender. Like if this is like a post-moral universe or an unmoral universe, whatever way you want to think about it, the respectability then bottoms out from her. Like whatever is respectable, if she is sort of the gladiator in power, then the things that she does, she sort of determines that. She's sort of the compass for it, like in the very first episode. And I think it's the only time that I see anything respectability politics related. Quinn comes in, she's just meeting Olivia, and Olivia's like, too much cleavage. That's like the first words that she says to her. But I don't think anything else like that happens, and the next thing we know, she's sleeping with the president. So then this question of sort of what is respectable and what is moral end up being, folded together in some strange ways. I don't know, I'm having some trouble pulling that thread through all the way, because I'm not sure that we are doing enough work to unpocket what we understand to be the trappings of respectability, whether it's stilettos, whether it's relaxed hair, whether it's the power suit, from what respectability politics actually meant to do or has asked us to do as far as what we want, how we want to represent ourselves to power, and then how that scale slides. Like how, okay, well, I'm wearing stilettos, but now I'm on display in ways, like one of the stories talking about, I'm on display in ways that are problematic, because the respectability here is wearing your yoga pants to work. Like there's interesting, I don't know, there's just an interesting play here that I wonder if we're asking respectability politics to do too much work and talking about Olivia and Annalise that maybe is not as useful.
I
That's,
wanna-
that's all.
I want to go back to Brittney's question about desire and sex. Let's go on talk. And I think it's interesting to see a woman who is buying the gloves, you know, like, because she's not, I mean, respectability is in the gloves. 'Cause, I mean, my mama was from the 1950s.
Yes.
And she had a whole different kind of selections of gloves. She
Right.
wore different outfits.
ones with
I don't know anything about gloves. I don't know gloves. And I don't want to. It's a little complex for me. You know, but she's not wearing those gloves anymore. She's wearing them because she's wearing a 3/4 length sleeve on that jacket that she knew that she went and bought those gloves on purpose to go with that. So, you know, she has to have on something because she knows the proper choice that you should make. But she looks better than any, there's no one else in the White House with the 3/4 length coat and the special gloves. So she's doing this for herself. Like, she's not doing it for the space of the White House. She's doing it because, like, I can fly above you.
It
I
marks
can
her.
actually look. Yeah, it marks her as really exceptionally different, from a different time and a different kind of place. And but the other piece of that is that it merges with her desire. Like, part of the way the sex scenes are constructed is that you see the sort of, you know, the pulling up of the beautiful dress and the hoochie. Like, she doesn't have a lot of, like, let's get all the way undressed sex. She has a lot of, like, I am still in my pretty clothes sex. And so, you know, it's a play.
Right.
And, you know, underneath this stuff, I can be who I want. I can desire who I want. I can make bad choices and good choices. I can make choices of men who really, to me, don't seem to desire her. They seem to desire to beat that man. That Jake cares to beat the president cares to beat Jake. And so they're real excited about Olivia because they don't want the other guy to win. They know each other personally.
So-
It's about their clashing of the dicks that's more the fight there rather than Olivia. If the other one's not there, I don't know if he care. Because, you know, the president isn't unmarried and Jake isn't like a regular person with a regular job. They're both engaged in their own world.
I love the way you said he isn't unmarried. You know? There's a way in which we need to talk about where men and black men had roles in these, and I think maybe more interesting in the the How to Get Away with Murder, what's happening with the black males in that show. But I want you to talk just briefly about the males, and then I'd like to open it up to questions because I have a feeling folks would like to join this conversation, and some might want to talk about sex and desire in a way. Well, I don't know, you got pretty close.
Yeah. She went from school.
That has already let us in.
So I'm going to try this because what I'm thinking is about the high wire, the life on the high wire. Whether it's you know, sex in the utility closet, or it's that courtroom scene where you are speaking of your husband as if he's a third party, you know, sort of unrelated to you, to exonerate a client, or you're Olivia in a whole array of scenes and hijinks. The pleasure of the high wire, of the risk. Is there a more powerful aphrodisiac? I'm sure there is, but I'm not sure. You know, then the risk, right? Then the risky stuff, right? The clandestine stuff, the risky stuff, where you're way out there.
But for a black woman, is that risk the same kind of thing that we would play with in this environment as we would for, let's say, a white woman? So her risk has the equal protection of a white woman's risk in this environment?
That's a great question.
And the sort of outing her when it comes, when she's known maybe as the possible mistress and things like that. And that, you know, to me, risk is adrenaline, right?
Yeah.
That's a certain kind, but it comes with a cost, because if we all live on adrenaline,
Absolutely.
we are actually killing ourselves.
Right.
So that's why black women die younger and that why we suffer more disease. It's because we're running on a constant adrenaline throughout our lives. So for Olivia, this is pleasurable, but it's also deadly.
Right.
Like literally deadly.
Right.
She
I
can't
think
be
you've
well.
got at the juxtaposition, or the space between the worlds that these extraordinarily powerful women operate in and choose to. And I want to argue or suggest that respectability itself might be something we elevate from that old archive of just the gloves to a moment where I can be respectable in the bedroom, in the whatever, my level of respectability, my determination, the self-determination about what that would mean. Do Black men have a role in this sort of articulation of where the protection of these women lie?
I mean, so Daddy Pope is the main Black male character. And I find him very interesting because, you know, well, except one, he gives those best Shonda speeches, right? And you know, he foretells the future. And he's kind of magical. He disappears. And so, you know, he really is sort of an amoral compass to this, you know, post-moral world. He's you know, calling the president a boy and saying, like, you know, I don't know. So it's an interesting juxtaposition that the president would normally have been empowered to call him a boy, right? Right. And yet he's like, no, you're playing here, and I'm letting you play here, and I let you do all these things, but really there's a deeper world behind this. And so it's interesting to have the Black man sort of be that voice in this universe. But I think, you know, for Black men consuming the show, oftentimes, you know, I told someone I was on this panel, they're like, I have a critique. What's your critique? Well, I mean, why is she having sex with white men? You know, and that's, you know, somehow a critique. But I think, you know, the choice not to center Black men as love interests, as sort of the powerful person emotionally in Olivia's life is an interesting one and a provocative one in comparison to the stories we have told about Black women in the past. And I think that's what draws a lot of Black women to the story and what repels some Black men from, you know, honestly even really watching it very well. Because that man then told me that he didn't actually watch the show.
Just a memory, remember, I think it was Sula, Toni Morrison's, where, you know, the thing that condemned her finally was that she slept with white men.
Yes.
Yeah, so here's another woman acting outside of her role, but what condemned her in the community's eyes was sleeping with white men.
Well, my crowning glory on Twitter was when I tweeted that Papa Pope was the head of the Illuminati. 613 is the Illuminati. And Joe Moore retweeted me. I was like, I'm winning. But yeah, I mean, we had Papa Pope, we had Edison Cosby 2.0, because y'all know he looked like Edison, who was boring and uninteresting and controlling and feeling entitled. And so he got shut down. And Harrison, right? Team Gingham. But what, you know, in the piece of treatment I wrote, one of the things we talked about with Harrison is that, you know, at least in the first couple seasons of the show, Black men were really uncomfortable with him, and everybody wanted a sexual angle. But Harrison's role was like what that Black woman secretary is usually in every show, right? They're supportive. They keep everybody together. They go in and motivate people. They're like for the cause, right? They're like the person you call to go get a talking to the like errant white girl, right? It's like, get your life together. What are you doing? And so he was that dude. Like he was that character. He was just a dude, right? Because if it had been a woman doing all the things that Harrison did, a Black woman, like a person of size, she would have been short and fat, and short and rotund, and right. See, and so she didn't know Empire. Right, Becky with the blonde hair. Empire, y'all know Empire. Love it. Gabby Cinnamon is a blonde girl named Becky. And so that's his role. I was like, if he were in the body of a Black woman, his role would make perfect sense to us. And no one would be like, he's undeveloped, he's flat, and whatever. But because he's a dude, they're like, why, you know, what can't he? Yeah, he's flat, and what, you know, and so it was like, and it was interesting because like the Black male feminists like wrote this critique. It was clear to me that he hadn't read Mark. And also, you know, I was like, what kind of rock and roll feminism are you on if what it unsettles you when you see a black man sort of unapologetically supporting this sister, right, to do her profession well, and where we keep relegating that kind of support work to, you know, a black woman of a certain type. And you know, and then with Edison, I mean, you know, I think that she was declaring declaring the death of that Cosby thing. I mean, he looked like Cosby. Olivia, when she was like, I don't want him, he looked a bit like Cosby. So what the representational read, not necessarily the intention behind the show, is that it says we're not going to do that Cosby thing. But what was interesting was his feeling of entitlement to it, right? Like, which sometimes happens with professional black dudes when they step to straight black women and they're like, well, I got a job though. I got a job and I got power and I'm educated and so why wouldn't you want me? What I'm suggesting though is, so yes, they have a space. Here's the thing Shonda doesn't get credit for though, which is that everyone says there's the critique about how she doesn't talk about race, but she's created a world in which a black man runs shit. Like the sort of core of the universe, power lies in Rowan or whatever, Eli Rowan, whatever his name is, Papa Pope. And so so in Wonderland, right, black people run things, they pull the strings, all of this sort of, you know, a black woman is worthy of powerful white men fighting over her stead. And I'm not saying we have to like those things, but I'm saying sometimes I wonder how we conclude that there is no racial vision behind these shows when she has given us a totally flipped moral universe in which this is what it potentially would look like if black folks embodied state power and really ran things and could make white people do what they wanted them to do.
I like this notion of race mattering, but maybe not in the way that we are able to interrogate it yet. We need to make the leap that Shonda Rhimes has made in terms of how power plays out when race doesn't announce itself. I do remember last night in her dream sequence when she said twice as good, and that resonates in an old way in terms of black families. You know, you have to be twice as good in order to. I want to invite you all to enter this conversation as you can. And we don't have to remember that legal frame. It's an interesting one for us, but there is a booty that's out there too. Who makes and unmakes these characters and what authorities they have. I think question here, yes.
Yeah. I love the panel. I like to say that I want to case for Miranda's booty because it was an unusual moment for us to have her make a transition around issues of domestic issues, right? So she got divorced because her husband could not support her, and then she got the young, fine brother, right? And he wants to always come and just make love to her. Yeah, that's a good job to come up and be with her. I mean, it's just right. That's a good job. So it's nice to get. So I want to make a case for her as a physical object of desire. And remember, it was her, the JJ, we first saw. Right, on ShondaLand, but we didn't see it. Well, you imagined it, right? Right. It was her child. I mean, she sexualized a black woman's body that was not supposed to be sexualized before she got, you know, to live and then. So I just wanted to think about how she figures in this universe. And in terms of respectability, she's known as the Nazi at first. That's some deep stuff. Black woman Nazi, right? You know, what do we do with that? But I want to stay with her sexually. I mean, just as and it's continually a thing. She was always be quiet. I won't tell you about that. You know, but it's going on, right? And with him, and I say he's fine. Okay.
I mean, it's amazing to have like a little thickum, short woman who looks very regular. And at first she doesn't even really believe, you know, him. She doesn't trust him. She's like, I'm just a little thickum. Like, but he's like, no. And so his doubling down and his commitment is interesting to sort of see and watch her enjoy, but to be hesitant about it, to be really smart about it, and not to just sort of jump into it. So I didn't mean to undevelop her, but she is not.
She's had three fine black.
That nerve.
Well, everyone in the whole
I'm sure there's an audience out there somewhere outside of us is trying to hear our we're having fun, folks, but we want you to too. So, question.
Yeah, I have a question about the power dynamic, and can Black women be powerful and still say that they need others for support? And I don't watch Grey's Anatomy because I feel like the storylines are so bizarre to me, like unrealistic, so I don't really watch it. But I was at the watch party last night, so I saw Dr. Gray at the very end literally do like this 5-minute soliloquy, and she brought me to tears in how we never see a Black woman allowed to say, I am tired, I need support. You know, Dr. Gray, and a few times I've watched it, she seems like she's kind of a mess. But she's a surgeon, so she's powerful, and she's raising children. She has this gorgeous husband that loves her. And, you know, she's telling the nanny all these things that she needs and really realizing, you know, oh my God, like, I need this, and I need this, and I need this. And she calls her husband, and he's like, we made this commitment, like, we're gonna do this. But Olivia is always saying, I don't need help, or Abby's telling her, you have to be the gladiator. Or, and even in our shows where there were healthy relationships, like in the sitcoms, like James in Florida or Cosby's, they seem more like equals, but not necessarily like one was more powerful than the other, maybe? I don't know, to me, like, you still don't see us breaking down Dr. Gray and saying, you know, that we need that. And you know, is that problematic? Like, I struggle with it. I'm a social worker, so I struggle with it with my patients because I'm like, you need help. You've been raped during domestic violence, and how they are determined to say, I can take care of myself. Like, I can't be weak. I have to be strong. And it impedes me being able to help them. I see it with myself. I mean, you know, like, it's just an interesting theme to me.
And well, who got to articulate that help narrative?
Well, and last night, it was Jesse Williams also, right? You know, who got to have this moment of extraordinary vulnerability and expression and interiority. And so I take your point as a way of sort of rereading that episode in ways that
Or even legally, like with the state, like Black women and women of color do not want the police coming to their house and intervening in their relationships. They want the violence to stop, but they do not want to utilize
One thing I read
the
legally
state.
last night in that episode about the mother who had hurt her children. We know there was a medical reason, but I think I tweeted something like, bring it before a court of law, and that medical reason would just go, you know, be dumped for here's a woman who hurt her children. So the difference between what our socialities allow us to feel, I think is a part of what she did with that moment, was allow that empathetic sociology to
And it is that same adrenaline of the excitement that is also the adrenaline of like, I can fight this. I will fight the bear. And always fighting the bear is killing us too. Both those things kill us. And you know, telling, I mean, because Black women love to be strong, and they will mark it in themselves and say, I am strong. And so they're looking at the world and saying, these people are not as strong as I am. And we're seeing that as a source of pride. But it's also the other hand that we cannot say, I am weak. I really can't do this, because then who do you turn to? And what apparatus?
Which is what the Gina Davis character is saying.
Yes. Yes. And you know, exactly who can fix me, and who can help me, and who can really be present in my life. And so, you know, Meredith Grey is turning to this woman because she's wealthy. And so she can sort of grip onto somebody and say, I'll pay you a fortune if you can just sort of be like, da 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 da. Most Black women don't have the resources to say, you know, please come, like, cook my dinner, do my laundry, be my friend, help me out, you know, make sense for my kids.
You know, that's right, that I write all along.
Yeah, and so that's such a resourced kind of lifestyle. And so most Black women don't know, if you turn to your friends, they're in the same kinds of circumstances. So you don't even want to burden them with it. So you know, we don't think about those things out loud. But I think Miranda, as a character, has sort of done those things. She's sort of tried to be strong and then completely failed. And then we've had the chance to sort of see her process her needs. So it's going to look different than Meredith. Like, she's not going to be crying to strangers. But she will, which is a good principle. But she she is going to ask for help. Eventually, she will hit her wall and she will need help. And so we have had a chance to see that character in that 18,000-year-long show.
I just want to bring in the church for a minute, because I think that a lot of what Black women struggle with is this idea that, you know, especially if you grow up in the church, as I did, that, you know, the respectable, when you think about respectability and even illegality, is that if you are a good Christian woman, then you are going to find a good Christian man who's going to protect you and take care of you. And so you get into a monogamous marriage and everything is going to sort of fall into place. But if you don't find that, then the sort of the unspoken implication is that there's something wrong with you. There's something that you're not doing right. There's something that you know, there's some way that you know, you're not living right. And so you need to kind of buck up and do what you need to, because you're not going to have the man take care of you. You're not, like, that's out of your reach. And I think that there's a whole population of us who are constantly struggling with this idea of, if I haven't found a husband, then, you know, I'm out there. And so I better get myself together and be strong and do what I need to do for myself.
But I mean, the interesting thing about the text of the church, I think there are multiple texts in church, right? So there's going to be, you know, there's literally the text, the text with the day. There's the preacher and sort of the male leadership in that space, but there's also the women's leadership, right, which is formal and informal. And for me, as a member of a traditional Black church, sometimes the most important texts are the women in that space to me, and the way that they live their lives and the way that they hold each other up, that it is a space where you can just cry and lay down on the floor and someone will come pat you and bring you a tissue and some water and hold you up, and then they'll help you figure out what to do with your kid.
But they will also label you Jezebel.
They will also
take you there.
I think there are churches where that will happen, and then there are churches where everybody in there will be the dame Jezebel. They don't do that.
Can I jump in as a bad Christian? As a preacher's kid, who still goes to church, I think they will hold you up when it looks like your struggle is a holy struggle.
Right.
My experience of being in church all my life is that they ain't trying to hold you up when you there because you got 5 babies by 4 different dudes, and you know. But if you shouting and you falling out because it looks like you trying to get right with God, then they will hold you up.
That's right.
But any other time they are. And please know that I have had every type of run-in with Black women in church you can imagine. But so that thing I was saying earlier. So it's not, I love the Black church. But it's challenging because I understand, because of that thing, right? So there was a story about a Black woman who married herself going around last week, and so the second version of the story that came out, this dude was like, if she wanted to get married, she should have figured out what was wrong with her, and then she could have been married, right? And so that thing about wanting to be chose, that's the reason I said it. Because so much of our desire in a heteropatriarchy is constructed around wanting to be chose, and then you go to church and you hear that you haven't been chose because either God is still working on you, so there's some other shit that you just. So white women getting chose, Asian women getting chose, but we'll let the church tell us that Black women are so uniquely pathological.
So we accept the fallibility of every institution as Black intellectuals, except for the fallibility of the church.
No, here's the thing. No, that's not my critique. No, but the church. But here's the thing, though, Blair. But the church won't let us have this conversation, right? Because I tried to have this conversation in my church with the women that I did ministry work with as a Baptist, as a committed committed Baptist person, which is like the worst denomination you can be. That's right. Progressive gender politics, right? And they were trying to have the sociological analysis piece be allowed when we're talking about how do we struggle together with God around how we think about ourselves. I try to introduce that, and I'm trying to do it in multiple spaces. And until my most current church, by and large, they don't allow the framework to be enlarged enough.
That's right.
But then you just said something. Until my most current church.
Which has a radical black feminist pastor who's a PhD. But most churches don't have PhDs for ministers. Most churches that black women go to don't even have women for ministers.
That's right.
But there's a way in which we say that then that's not a church.
No, I think that is the church. That's the church I know. That's the church
I think we need to demand of churches that they be our church, that they be the church that we need, that they be the church that we are interested in, and not just say that the church is there.
I'm trying to say all that stuff going to the show though. So our narrative about morality, to flip it back. So our narrative about morality and a lot of the early critiques of scandal, a lot of the conversation, because here's the thing, the respectability conversation we're having, part of the reason we're never honest about that conversation, Carla, is because respectability is deeply tied to this right-wing turn in Christian theology too, that lots of black communities adhere to. We don't, in our set, we have a critique, right? Even if we're in the church, we have a critique, a narrative, and some language. But a lot of folks haven't even ever heard the term politics of respectability, so they don't always recognize how what we call good, just conservative Christian theology is actually a lot of the tenets of a politics of respectability that has a specific moment in history that it comes about, and it has particular political uses. So what happens is those women elevate what is political to the level of theological, and then they can't get out of it. So when they watch shows like this, they can't even embrace the pleasure that they feel because they feel like it's some commentary on their moral being.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna let you finish. But Mark has a panel of Black Christianity. Our other panelists here and also the questions from the audience. And you can listen to each other.
So I'm kind of nervous because mine does have to do with the church.
Okay, but
ShondaLand. So ShondaLand has 3 black women who, in maybe earlier years, you saw Miranda have a relationship with the church, but by and large, you don't see that at all with Olivia and with Annalise. Yet they have such access to power through their performance, and so it for me begins to question in this post-moral society of ShondaLand, where black women perform church but have no access to power within the church. Is there a way that ShondaLand can help us reimagine spaces for, or reimagine a relationship with black women and spirituality or religiosity that does not primarily have a place in the church?
I'm going to ask if Jessica or Martha have a response.
Yeah, I'm listening. I'm listening. And I have a couple reflections that may not go all the way to your question, but I was asking myself what Olivia and Annalise do on Sunday, right? You know, and I had never asked myself that, literally or metaphorically, sort of where they are, what they do. And I think my answer, reflecting, is they work. Right? And so I'm trying to think about the relationship between those two spheres of knowledge, of understanding, of making sense of the world and what's lost, right? When work becomes the sphere, right, through which we make sense of the world, through which we interpret the world. And so that's just a point of reflection, right? It's an observation, but I think it's not one that's irrelevant to us in the ways we understand our lives can, in fact, become organized and reorganized around an idea of work or an idea of vocation, an idea of demand, where I spend time with you all, literally and figuratively, and I know how many hours you work. I know that on Sunday you're doing many things, but you're on. And so I think there's at least a point of reflection there for us.
I think that to go along with that also, I mean, as you guys were speaking, I was thinking in ShondaLand, do people even go to church? Like, I mean, we have the one character,
The one in Grey's
in Grey's
Anatomy.
Anatomy, but for the most part, we don't have a narrative of people's spiritual lives. We have people who are expressing ideas of morality in post-war work, but not necessarily expressing a relationship to a heavenly being or a supreme being, whatever they may be. And I think that that's really important to kind of keep in mind, especially as we're approaching the show, this relationship between the kind of Afro-Protestant Black church in the U.S. with Blackness, and that these things often are tied together in very specific ways. But Black people diasporically can approach the show from a whole host of directions, whether the church is an important part of their lives or not. And I think that there's something to that. It could be good or bad or post-war, whatever it may be. But I think that it is a careful thing to approach the show with. Black women view the show like this when Black women are diasporically so diverse, even in watching the show, and have very diverse relationships, even if they are U.S. African Americans, to the church also. And we were using the church as sort of a marker of what Blackness and what Black womanhood means, and that is important, but we should make it distinct from everybody who is coming to and approaching the show, because anybody can approach Olivia. I read Olivia through a Caribbean lens. Like, she's beat to the nines. Like, there's something about that performance of there's an extra femininity to her that you can approach it whether it's heteronormative, you can approach it whether you're in the U.S., whether you're in the Caribbean. Like, there are all these aspects to her that are really, really based in a whole series of Black female tropes. That I don't know, that I think we lose when we begin to view Black womanhood and how Shonda is portraying it only through a particular church narrative.
One way to think about it is that it is a text that's deliberately evaded in the way that she has placed, however the regulatory environment here is, it's about law, it's not about the law of religion. So she certainly centered that with How to Get Away with Murder and Scandal. So it's all about legality in that very particular state-centered, state-produced way. Question back here?
I had a question regarding Millie and Olivia Pope's relationship. I find it to be the most interesting. You all spoke about the layers.
Yeah.
And at first, very often, when there's an affair and we like the affair, we can justify it by saying, well, the wife knows and she sucks anyway, so it's all good. And as we got to know Millie, I actually like her. I think she's very interesting. But as we got to know her, as Shonda unpacked who she is and where she comes from and what she believes, and then this relationship that she has with Olivia, because what Millie wants is power, period. And if she has to, bring this woman in who makes her husband happy, which will keep her in power, I can do that. And so I find that relationship, the interplay between Millie, the president, but Olivia Pope, and Shonda probably, but just the way that they have interwoven this relationship, to me is really fascinating. So
I really find Millie profound, because when we encounter her, we encounter sort of the Republican white woman, and we were happy to put her in that little spot. But then when we meet her, and then when she's suffering and she's mourning, the last one, I found that really profound and important to sort of to honor that she had sacrificed to be in that relationship, that she does love him. She doesn't have a good relationship with him. She's not healthy, and he's not healthy, but she actually loves her husband, so much so that she's like, well, for us to do this, to navigate this world, because her power is really also about sort of honoring the struggle that she put into the marriage, right? And so she wants something to result from it, both for him and for her. And so it's really interesting to sort of see, unpack sort of the person that we're supposed to hate, and that we're supposed to just want to get off the stage. We can't be comfortable with him. Where is it, Vermont or wherever she's going to be making jams? Very dull to me. but we don't want her shoved off. We really don't want her erased, and we want her to find something too. And so I like the complexity that she's been able to find in a character that the audience normally wouldn't be very sympathetic to.
The writers have also given her us a way to understand it, and bringing in the elderly ex-president's wife, former president's wife, to instruct her how to use her. And I think seeing that relationship evolve, then we get a backstory about this is how power is both articulated and taught. Yes, question?
So one of the biggest complaints I get when I'm on Facebook is that these shows tell too much of our business. That's the biggest #1 thing I get. And then when I talk to my mother and her friends, they say, oh, that's just too much, and her taking off her makeup, and why she gonna look like that, and take off her hair, what is that? And so I thought it was interesting in thinking about that, and then thinking about what happened with the First Lady this last week in Saudi Arabia, and this whole thing about her being this feminist model, when I kind of got the impression that she was like, what? Like, that wasn't her intention of being this feminist model, and that they keep putting this thing on her, like, she gotta be a fighter, she has to be this, and then sometimes like, oh no, she's not this. And so I'm kind of wondering, there's these 4 women who are in the White House right now, these 4 black women who are in the White House, and they're constantly put in these positions where they have to perform in the same way kind of that Olivia and Annalise have to perform. And I kind of wanted to hear what your ideas were about that, if that's what you see, or and what kind of feedback, if you even think that way. Maybe I'm off base, but what do you think?
Well, I think it's important to say there's two girls and 2 women.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Valerie Jarrett.
My child just turned 13, and so I'm getting all of the teenage angst in my face all at once. So, I'm feeling this, and so I'm wondering, as the stuff that came out with Sasha and Malia a couple months ago, with this woman talking about
well, to me, that's why we assert that they are girls, right?
Right.
They are not. The society need not frame them as women. As much as they might think they are women in their heads, that's their job. But we need to remember that they're girls, and we would remember if they were in different bodies that they were girls. They're not deserving of that kind of judgment. But I do think, and I love to hear from everybody else. And shut up sometimes. But that Michelle is very much engaged in sort of Olivia Pope performance. Because if we remember old Michelle, before Michelle was First Lady Michelle, and before she was running for office Michelle, she wasn't that snatched. Like, she was a working woman, she had some suits, and it was, just regular clothes, and she would wear a snatchback all the time, and she was just a regular, beautiful, everyday person. But she on the campaign and in the White House, she's making very important choices about who she wears and what she wears, that some of it's high end and some of it's from Target, and some and she's making very strategic political choices about the way that she presents herself in the world. So I don't think there's probably any accident. I doubt she just didn't think about Saudi Arabia and covering her head. Pretty sure she just was like, oh, well, I'm gonna walk outside now. And that's the decision I made about what I'm going to do in that space. And I bet she was interested in inserting that in that moment. So she's very political in presentation of her girls and of herself. And she's done a good job of mostly keeping her mama away from all of that.
Her as one of the women.
Yeah.
But Martha, Jessica?
Yeah, so for me, the moment to reflect upon your question, Erica, comes very early in the administration. You'll remember when Michelle Obama, when they released her official photographic portrait, and she's not wearing sleeves. And if we understand that to be a profoundly intentional moment, it links, I think, to our conversation about scandal in the sense of, so are we in a moment when a culture of dissemblance, a politics of respectability is being at least displaced or complicated by what clearly is a politics of pleasure, right? It is for all the cheap shots that people take at Michelle Obama's arms. don't we know that that it's absolutely pleasure, right? It's absolutely pleasure, right, to take off the cardigan, right, and to be that, right? That you can't help but read that image in part through that way. And so is Shonda sort of reflecting that? Is Shonda generating that? I'm sure both are true, but they seem deeply in conversation, at least to me.
Yeah, two things. One is, this conversation reminds me about the ongoing debate about where do we see feminist politics, right? Because, so part of the conversation about Michelle this week was this a feminist move? And then I saw people being, so I saw all the think pieces, right? So some were like, it's feminist, and others were like, she's still supporting imperial state power, and I was like, okay. So I never know what to do with Black woman in that, right? I'm just always like, other than Condoleezza Rice, if your husband becomes the president, what you supposed to do? Be like, I'm anti-statist. Like, that's, I just don't know how that's gonna work. So I never quite know what to do with that particular strand of radical feminist critique about Michelle Obama's possibility, because that's the radical feminist stuff, and then the liberal feminists are all on the, well, she's on the mommy track now, so she's the mom in chief, and so she's not feminist for that. So it's always the narrative about how can we disqualify her from accessing politics, which means that they don't ever have to acknowledge all the battle that it takes to just do that, right? To just step out and be herself, right? In the most fabulous of ways. And then we apply that critique to Scandal. So there's been a lot of conversation about, is Scandal feminist? And the first couple of seasons it wasn't particularly feminist in the sense that Olivia Pope was always throwing white women under the bus to protect the president. It didn't matter what happened to them. And I would be tweeting Treva and the ninjas, the pleasure ninjas, who I tweet with on Thursday nights and saying to them, Scandal is no country for white women, because it really didn't feel like it was. And then in the last couple seasons, you've seen a shift, right? So there's been far more moments of like forthright feminist advocacy from the characters, and then in terms of the cases that she takes on. So it's interesting in that way. I don't know that we can pin it down, but I just always wonder. Part of it is it represents the kind of tension that Black women always exist in relationship to feminist politics, which is to say that we could be doing something radically embodied, which is itself politically important, but it doesn't always work in terms of calling it feminist or not feminist or whatever, right? So we had that problem from Beyonce to Michelle.
I'm so happy to be in this audience. So just a quick question and a short comment. Thank you for bringing out the notion of the diaspora and the heterogeneity in Black women's spiritual practices, because I think it's problematic to frame all Black women who engage with the show as Black Christian when we know that can't possibly be true. So the thing I wanted to say is that in this discussion about the state and how the state factors into ShondaLand, can we talk about marriage and the side pieces? That's the only thing I haven't heard you guys talk about. So, how is marriage as a kind of heteronormative state structure treated in ShondaLand, across those shows?
Over the lunch, I was talking with Don Solomon, who was here this morning from the National Humanities Center, and linking the representations of marriage, the engagements of marriage, to debates about marriage equality, and we at least were breathing sort of an extraordinary sigh of relief, right? Which is to say, Shonda gives us gives us good old-fashioned marriage, right? Doesn't give us straight-jacketed, for public consumption, for political objectives marriage, right? She gives us marriage, right, that is messy and complex and uneven, and I have to say, we were saying, and thank goodness, right? Who was going to ask those questions, right, about marriage in an era when both queer and straight people across the spectrum, right, were all straitjacketed, right, by a debate, an important political campaign and debate, right, that has recrafted marriage into, a picket fence and 2.5 children and all of those things. And Shonda's sort of opening us, sort of marriage that endures, marriage that is messy, all those things, and it's a breathing space, I think, for thinking about marriage and what it is and how it works and what it might be what it means.
And she always makes marriage like fundamentally unrealistic, particularly in the glossy kind of way. Because when we do go to Vermont and we imagine it, it looks ridiculous. And so she holds it out like, you know, this is what she's supposed to desire, but doesn't this look stupid? This doesn't even look like Olivia.
The dog had a white strap.
Yeah, I mean, you know, everything's wavy and glossy and shiny and everyone's very happy. And so she's basically saying, you know, let's throw out that imagined thing and see marriages for what they are, both in their construction, their destruction, their complication, the infidelity, all of the messy. She does it to gay marriage. They don't have a good, happy, you know, like we've gotten here and now we're gonna have good gay marriage. No, you want to kill, evidently you want to assassinate your husband. And so, you know, it's all complicated. And I heard you guys were using the word messy to talk about it.
Messy is working.
Definitely.
In the gray?
No, I was just gonna say, with the marriage thing, one thing, I've noticed, like, within, the Black community, especially with women, is, and one thing I do like what Shonda, she does, so, you know, I've been told throughout my life, and I've heard this before, you have to get married, you have to find a man, and then you'll be happy. You can't be a single woman with a child and not be happy, or you're gonna be on welfare, you're gonna, like, stuff like that, and everything is gonna be rainbows and sunshine with marriage, especially as a Black woman, but that's not the case. I mean, and I think one thing I do like about Scandal is Olivia Pope is this woman. She's successful, and she's not married, nor she's looking for marriage. She's successful, her standing and how she is, and with How to Get Away with Murder, she was married. I don't know if the husband. I don't know what's happening to the husband right now because I'm behind. But it's complicated. So and it's not. And I mean, Bailey's had her times where things have gotten difficult with her husband. And Dr. Weber, he had an affair, and his wife is. Yeah, so it's not always the spectrum in which our the Black community believes is, and it's broader than that. So that's one thing I do like about ShondaLand. Like she makes everything raw reality that I don't think any show has done ever.
I think raw is a really good word. It's sort of equal opportunity, dysfunction. Exactly.
I wonder about the ways, the question of marriage is really interesting, so I'm glad you brought it up. I wonder about the ways that I'll come back. Marriage. What about the ways that so in ShondaLand, do we see there's marriage as sort of the partnership and the romance and the building a life together and all those aspects that, you know, sort of in ShondaLand seem to happen outside of the boundaries of state power potentially. So like Gray and Derek get married on a Post-it, and they don't actually get married until they have to adopt the young girl. So I'm wondering, and I'm just sort of processing it now, thinking about the ways that, what are the moments in ShondaLand that you actually do see the state intervening and interceding in your intimate and domestic life? Like that was one moment where they had to get married because the state said you cannot have this child that you have created kinship with unless you follow these rules that we have given you. And we have Callie in Arizona who get married, and it's not, I don't think it's ever really clear if it is within legal boundaries of where they are in Seattle. So like but we don't see that often. Like we don't see the custody battles. We don't see, the battles over property and exchange of property. We don't see necessarily issues of insurance and taxes and all the things that come with the state management of these relationships. I'm just sort of realizing that now and thinking about what is there to that, and is there something that works for us and that we don't then have to see that. We don't have to deal with those aspects of marriage. We can enjoy the parts of it, and that's provocative. Like Natalie was saying, this is maybe the first polyamorous Black figure we've seen. Like that's extremely important to imagine relationships that are long-term, that are consensual, that are lasting outside of the boundaries of marriages. But where do we see the kind of violences that also can occur, or the breaks where you have to write something down, and what does that mean, especially a legal
The thing that comes
conversation
to
here.
me is the language you're using around custody and property. We've talked about in terms of I choose me. I'm going to own me. I'm going to make. So it's almost as if they shift from that terrain of family, however we want to make our families cohere, to the terrain of the individual. And is the individual the black woman who is able then, maybe this is where the state-centered argument takes place, who is then able to take up those rights in her own body, or at least have space of arguing them. There was a question in the back.
Can I jump in?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. One thing that I want to say too, there's like I don't know if this book is out yet, but this guy, white sociologist, writing this book about how, more and more Americans are single or remaining unmarried, and so we're, in the next couple decades going to be a country where the majority of adults are unmarried, not married. And so part of that though is that this is this thing where we don't always give black women credit for the ways of living that we pioneer, right? And so we are sort of at the forefront of imagining what black singlehood looks like and how to do that in a generative way. And so we're still in a moment where that's pathologized because it doesn't meet particular norms, but it is the way that the country itself is moving. And so what would happen if we thought of these shows as in the way that they problematize marriage and in the way that they show us the sort of dark underbelly of marriages, also opening up this broader conversation on the backs of black women, right? But maybe also with them having some subjectivity and agency to think about how we have full lives, right, as unmarried people. And that's important because I think a lot of the black feminist pleasure work works in part because most of the folks who do it are unpartnered people, right, who are thinking about, who now have to think about, how do I build a life if I don't have a partner that I can rely on? I don't have a ready go-to support system. I don't have a ready go-to economic backup plan, right? I mean, assuming that your partner can be that, right? And so then it requires a level of intention about how do you build a community of support. If you want to have children, how do you parent them and what kind of model do you do that in? How can you be economically self-sustaining when in a world where black women still make so much less than almost every other demographic group, save Latinas, and then but you have to live, and so you don't have any of the safety nets. So I think that the short point is perhaps ShondaLand is participating in a broader social theorization of how to be of singlehood that black women are actively doing in terms of practice and theorizing, therefore, and not getting credit for. And so what would it mean to think about it as that kind of project?
Let me suggest, I think I want to turn this back to Mark. I was going to say we had room for one more question, but we're really close to two. That another thing that is inventing here that we can certainly take note of is the way in which Brittney, Jessica, Martha, and Blair, and the earlier panel, Joan, Treva, Lisa, and Natalie, recreate what might be an academic conversation, so that you hear substance rather than a paper. You hear us responding back and forth to each other rather than something that I prepared 2 weeks ago and was working on the airplane to fit. So one of the things that we might do as black women academics, especially in ways in which we enjoy our virtual conversations with each other, is to replicate the conversations in this kind of panel, and I want to thank Mark for doing this. Comments for us?
I think Laurent and I both are pretty amazed. We knew what the content was going to be. We knew putting these women, these voices, these intellects together was going to produce what it produced. But the fact that it did, in fact, reach audiences that we wanted to do. Forum for Scholars in Public. We all do the scholars piece really well. We all do the public piece for ourselves very well. Very rarely do we actually get publics in here. So the fact that they're Duke students and Central students, we had a wide range of Triangle community folks that were at the screening last night. That means we're doing the kind of work that we really wanted to do. And the fact that black women's voices were at the forefront of this conversation makes it even that much more important. So thank you all for coming out and supporting.